This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Exposure to lead can be devastating to a person's health. To put it in local context, that's why there's an effort underway to replace the many thousands of lead pipes in St. Louis. Updating that infrastructure is and will be a huge city challenge. But the problem of lead exists in other ways and in other parts of the St. Louis region. Bald eagles, for instance, don't rely on plumbing to get their water. Yet just last month, 2 bald eagles rescued by the World Bird Sanctuary were treated for lead poisoning. Despite best efforts, both eagles were eventually euthanized. It's far from the first time the sanctuary has seen lead turn up in rescued wildlife. The sanctuary says it's treated 64 patients with lead poisoning in 2024 alone. To talk about how lead gets into the wild and how it affects birds like those 2 bald eagles, I'm joined by Klebee. She's the Rehabilitation Director at the World Bird Sanctuary. Kira, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you.
Now, Kira, the World Bird Sanctuary is based just west of St. Louis, as we noted in Valley Park, and its patients are wildlife. And as the name suggests, it's mostly birds that you're seeing there. Talk to us about these 2 bald eagles. How is it that they arrived at the sanctuary?
So all of our patients come to us because someone sees the bird in distress and gives us a call. We then dispatch rescuers to contain the bird and bring it into our facility for assessment and treatment. Mm-hmm. So both of these birds were seen kind of unable to fly, not doing well, and were brought to our hospital. Mm-hmm. For bald eagles, we actually test every single one that comes to our hospital for lead, regardless of their other injuries, because over 70% of them have lead, either as their primary injury or as their secondary one. Mm-hmm. These 2 had no other physical injuries other than the fact that they were emaciated, which is extremely skinny, and then had high levels of lead. So we tested them first thing in-house to determine that, yes, they were suffering from lead poisoning. One of them actually had such high lead levels, it's higher than our machine can actually read.
Oh, wow.
So that's over 65 micrograms per deciliter, and they can start showing symptoms essentially above 5 micrograms per deciliter.
Mm-hmm. And is there something about bald eagles that places them at elevated risk for lead contamination?
Yes, bald eagles rely heavily on scavenging for parts of their diet, so they're part of our nature's cleanup crew. So they're cleaning up discarded gut piles, roadkill, or other carcasses for us, and a lot of those have lead in them. The primary source of lead poisoning for raptor species is ingestion of fragments of lead ammunition or lead fishing tackle.
Yeah. So the 2 that came in, you said one of them had levels so high that the machine would not even register how much was. Do you know where that particular bird was rescued, and if it sort of follows a pattern of what has been seen over the years of wildlife affected by lead poisoning?
That one was found near St. Clair, I believe, but it doesn't really seem to matter which area they come from. Any that are out in the wilderness that are scavenging these carcasses are coming in with similar levels of lead. Bald eagles are the ones most likely to register as high on this because it does not take a very large fragment of lead shot to spike their blood levels that way, so that they can ingest just a small piece. So a single lead bullet can fragment into over 500 pieces when it hits a deer or other target, and they get distributed up to 2 feet from the actual impact site throughout the body, so they can travel a large distance. So it's really easy for a bald eagle who's picking up a free meal to accidentally get a little piece, and the large surface area of that is enough to cause this level of lead in their blood and kill them.
Right. I'd like to invite you to the conversation as well. Do you have questions about how lead is affecting wildlife overall in the St. Louis region or the work that's underway at the World Bird Sanctuary? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. So these birds coming in, how is it that you and your team, Kira, try to help these bald eagles get to a healthier place?
So for lead, we're going to provide what's called chelation treatment, and these are going to be a combination of meds. We primarily are using two different ones, one that's injectable, one that's oral, that help remove the lead from the tissue, and it binds to the lead and allows the kidneys to flush it from the body. So this can reduce their overall blood levels. They'll get this medication twice a day for 5 days, then they'll receive 2 days off, then they'll receive a retest of their blood, and if they still have elevated lead, we'll continue to treat with repeated rounds of chelation. We're also providing fluids in this time because both the lead and these medications are going to be very hard on their kidney functions, so providing fluid therapy to keep them hydrated. And for these ones that are in really severe condition, like these two bald eagles, we're often placing catheters to provide that hydration. Or in one of these cases, we did attempt a blood transfusion, and that blood can help dilute the lead that's already in their blood, as well as provide them with healthy blood to kind of get everything functioning a bit better to hopefully fight off some of the symptoms of the lead poisoning while we work on getting that metal removed from their body. In a lot of cases, they actively have metal still in their GI tract, so they still have fragments in their stomach. So in these cases, we may try and induce vomiting to get it out of there or flushing the stomach to try and remove those fragments to prevent them from absorbing more lead into their system.
And is this a round-the-clock treatment regimen that they need to be under?
So they do need intensive care, so they're going to get usually about 11 hours of kind of monitored care throughout the day, where we're seeing them repeatedly providing small increments of care. And then they're going to be hooked up to that fluid pump through their catheter 24/7. But the chelation medication itself is given usually every 12 hours.
Well, sadly, your best efforts were not enough to help these two bald eagles recover. How is it that you all at the World Bird Sanctuary approach that decision, which is a difficult one, to euthanize these animals that are suffering?
It is always really a difficult decision to look at the animal and go, is your suffering so much and your chance of recovery so little that we do humanely euthanize you? And a lot of that comes from the experience that we have working with these cases and knowing when their symptoms indicate organ failure versus when it is just the miserable feeling of having lead toxicity. So both of these two started exhibiting the signs of organ failure, which there is no way for us to reverse that. So once they've kind of gone into organ failure, you can just expect them to continue to decline. They start having increased breathing issues, which most of the lead patients are also on oxygen support for that initial care. But when they start experiencing those declining symptoms despite treatments, then it's usually time to let them go and not continue to suffer.
We have Ralph, who is calling from Owensville. Ralph, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for taking my call. I lived my whole life in Missouri, and my grandfather was a house painter, and he painted with lead paint. And the lead paint was made in St. Louis for over 100 years before it was discovered to be a problem. But also the fact that the eagles are getting into the lead that was mined for the battery content and that, and the use in paints and that, and any animal that was a meal for the eagles, including fish. I'm sure the eagles are finding out that it's detrimental to them, but the lead, even though they stopped mining lead years ago, it's still in the soil and it's still out there, and it's unfortunate, but it made a lot of money for a lot of people in Missouri, and I'll step off.
Right. Ralph, thank you so much for calling with some of that historical background. Kira, beyond bald eagles, I mean, how are wild animals in the St. Louis region encountering lead, and how much of what Ralph has talked about is the source of lead poisoning for the wildlife around here?
So environmental contamination is definitely still a concern, and this kind of brings us to the difference between chronic and acute lead poisoning. So chronic lead poisoning is going to be from like repeated exposure to low levels. So these are going to be what we're getting from the environmental contamination. And if a bird lives in a heavily contaminated area, they're going to be more prone to that chronic lead poisoning where they're getting those repeated areas. So areas where there's still lots of lead paint flakes, or areas where we did have that industry and the soil is going to be more heavily contaminated. That is going to be an increased risk for birds in those areas. The symptoms associated with chronic lead poisoning are less severe than those associated with acute lead poisoning. So acute lead poisoning is going to be when they've ingested a larger amount and have a rapid increase in their blood lead. And these are the ones that are causing more severe symptoms such as seizures, balance issues, vomiting, and even sudden death from that. So of the bald eagles we're seeing, the bald eagles are more prone to that acute lead poisoning from ingesting a fragment. So the bald eagles and the vulture species, which are our two heavily scavenging groups of birds, are more prone to that acute ones. So about 50% of the ones we get with lead poisoning from those species are acute lead poisoning where they've ingested a fragment of lead. The other 50% we can't really determine if it's from environmental contamination or if it's from ingestion of fragments over time. The body can process some of that out over time, so if they're not receiving a toxic dose right away, they do slowly filter that out, but as they continue to get repeated exposure, they'll build up more and more. So for some of the other species that are less prone to eating gut piles, the environmental contamination is going to be a larger part of their lead poisoning. So this is going to be things like Cooper's hawks, which actually, they'll live in our cities and they're primarily bird eaters. So they're eating like pigeons and stuff in our cities. So the pigeons are picking up that lead dust from the environment and getting small levels of lead in their system. And then the Cooper's hawks are getting lead poisoning from eating the pigeons and then building up in their systems over time. But for our bald eagles and vultures, it is primarily ingestion of lead shot and lead sinkers. And for those waterfowl populations, lead fishing tackle is also a major risk. In one study, they were looking at loon mortality, and they found that over 50% of the loons that they found dead during the breeding season of the adult ones was from direct ingestion of lead fishing tackle bits at the bottoms of the lakes.
So there's a circle of life story here that is not at all positive, and we as humans are involved in this too. We're talking today about the danger lead poses to wildlife, like to bald eagles, and also to humans. And I'm here with Kira Klebee, who is the Rehabilitation Director at the World Bird Sanctuary. Now, I understand that the sanctuary treated 64 patients with lead poisoning this year, and that makes up about 8% of the wildlife that is coming through for rescue. Now, is that number typical for what you see annually?
Yeah, so our patient load has been increasing, but that percentage that are suffering from lead remains fairly constant.
As far as seasons go, too, I understand that fall and winter are seasons where you're seeing more of these.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Lead cases. Why is that so?
We do see more during essentially our hunting seasons, and that is especially true for those acute cases. So where we have lead actually in the GI tract where we can see the fragments on x-rays, those are going to primarily occur during the hunting season, and that is from ingesting those discarded gut piles or deer that was shot but then not recovered because it survived the injury long enough to die elsewhere and then get eaten instead of by the humans who were attempting to hunt it. Versus the kind of more chronic cases that we're seeing, we see those kind of evenly year-round, the more environmental contamination ones. But we always see that uptake in those acute ones during the winter months.
And to clarify, when you're talking about gut piles, you're talking about the remnants that are left by hunters out in the wild after they've made their kill?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there are times that lead comes into the food that is donated to your raptors. So this is a case of unwitting exposure. How does that happen, and what are the measures that are taken? at the World Bird Sanctuary to ensure that that food does not then go to the birds who've come to you for rescue?
Yeah, we're very careful with all of our food sources that are donated, so anything that was ever wild caught is actually x-rayed before being considered for food. So this can be rabbits, venison, squirrels, anything at all that was hunted and then donated. Venison is going to be the primary donation for this, and sometimes it's hunters cleaning out their freezer for the next year. So it was already packaged for human consumption. Sometimes people enjoy hunting for sport but don't want to actually consume the meat, so they'll donate the whole deer to us. Sometimes we also get roadkill deer donated from Missouri Department of Conservation, and all of those will get scanned on our X-ray machine and will identify lead or metal fragments in it. So metal will show up as white, so it's really easy to identify. So we will scan all of that, and any fragments, any pieces that have metal, we'll remove the metal if we can and still use the rest, or if it's too dispersed through it, we will toss out the whole thing because we don't want to be feeding that metal to our animals.
There may be some folks, Kara, who are listening to this and thinking, what do bald eagles have to do with me? How is it that the health of raptors affect them, even if they are living in more urban environments?
So even if it's not the bald eagles that you're specifically thinking affect your health, the lead in the shot from the animals hunted affect humans who consume it as well. So when they looked at meat that had been packaged from hunting for human consumption, they found metal fragments in over a third of it, just through a random sampling of X-ray. So that metal fragment, those fragments are there, and lead poses a very real risk to human health as well,
Right.
Both through acute poisonings and chronic exposure. So using lead alternatives for your ammunition is a great way to reduce the health risk for your family and for our wildlife. As for how our wildlife health affects our populations, our wildlife is creating kind of healthy environments for us to enjoy. So these gut piles and other carcasses that would remain in the environment, if they were allowed to just sit out there without being consumed by other animals, they rot, bacteria proliferates, and they are a risk of disease transmission to humans. So by having scavengers that clean these up, that affects human health, gives us healthier environments with lower disease loads that could potentially give us a disease. So it's really important that we have healthy populations of these scavengers to continue to provide this cleaning service and that we're not poisoning them in the process.
On that note of disease, there's another health danger that is affecting both wildlife and people, and that is avian flu. Now, this is something that has been on the sanctuary's radar for some time. What are some of the steps that you all at the World Bird Sanctuary have taken in response to avian flu?
So yeah, the current avian flu outbreak of the highly pathogenic variety started in the United States in 2022. And in response to that, we built a quarantine area. We had not previously had one. And this is where we're checking in all of our neurological patients. So avian influenza can transmit directly from birds to humans through fecal matter or shed viruses. So we want to be very careful. Any of us who are working with these potential cases are wearing full PPE when working with them, checking them in. Avian influenza for raptors, unfortunately, is over 99% fatal for the ones that are coming into our centers. It's unclear at this point if there are some that are experiencing milder symptoms that are not getting admitted, but for the ones that are experiencing symptoms that bring them in, it is over 99% fatal to raptor species, which is just a devastating amount.
Yeah.
So we're being very careful when handling them and making sure we don't have transmission between patients or to humans. But it is also a concern for human health, so then we are sending any suspicious patients in are being tested by the state Missouri Department of Conservation to monitor the progression of the disease. They're monitoring our waterfowl populations, which is the wild reservoir for the disease. But it's had a major impact on the poultry industry, so people have probably noticed rising poultry and egg prices. This is because over 100 million birds have died of this, of the poultry.
And on the note about the Missouri Department of Conservation, last month it did send out a report, or said that they were monitoring sick and dead waterfowl, as you've mentioned, geese, ducks, all across the state. And these are animals that we see, even here in the city. The department had also said that it was studying whether those deaths are related to avian flu because it could potentially be something else, and noted that Although avian flu doesn't pose an immediate public health concern, it is advising people to not touch dead birds they find and then to report sightings of dead geese to the department. What is the danger, Kira, for avian flu spreading to humans?
Yes, so it's going to primarily, there have been several human cases of avian influenza from this. A lot have been through farm workers who work with poultry, or it has also spread to cattle, so people who are working with those, and it's been found in several domestics. The main risks to human health are going to be through touching infected animals and then like touching your mouth or nose, kind of getting that transmission through your mucous membranes, or by consuming undercooked food products that contain it. So people that is how the majority of raptors get it, is through ingesting meat of infected animals. So when they eat a waterfowl that had avian influenza, that's how they get it. And that is how humans could get it. There have also been a number of human companion animals, cats and dogs, that have gotten avian influenza from like raw poultry products that they've consumed that was contaminated. So it's a very real health risk. So people should not touch dead wildlife, and people should make sure they're fully cooking any meat products, that even though the USDA is doing everything it can to keep infected products out of our food chain.
So if we were to look back at 2024, we talked about the number of birds that have been brought in, and the sanctuary had a very busy year with 774 patients total, and that was a record year. What is it that accounted for that increase in the past year of 2024?
A large amount of this is due to increased public awareness. So actually, over the past 6 years, we've continued to see increases. 2018 was actually our first year taking in over 400 patients. It was a huge milestone for us. And we've since progressed through 500, 600, and 700 and are approaching the 800 mark. And a lot of this has been our efforts to raise awareness of our rehabilitation services amongst the public, including expanding our rescue range. So we now have a volunteer group of over 100 transporters who help us go get these patients and bring them to our hospital. Our rescue radius is about 2 to 3 hours because a lot of those places do not have a closer rehab center for them to go to. So we're really trying to raise awareness of our services, to know that there is someone here to help these injured birds and that we can come get them, because we don't want any bird to go without the treatment that it needs to return to the wild. So we really want people to call us, and we want them to know that this is at no cost to them. We are a nonprofit. We do all of our care through donations. So the people who bring us the birds, there's no cost to them for them to get that bird treatment.
And if I'm recalling correctly, as we close here, we did speak with folks from the World Bird Sanctuary in the spring, and there was some conversation there about how to deal with birds in distress. As you were looking at 2025 and the spring and summer seasons, what is it that you're preparing to focus on?
So, we're preparing to focus on increased numbers. Right now, we are in our slower season, but we are preparing essentially for our next baby season, which is when busy season kicks off. So we are actually building some new aviaries to support that increased patient capacity, as well as specially designed aviaries with more natural features for baby development. So that's one of the big projects we're working on right now. We're also working on expanding our critical care capacity for these patients that do need like blood transfusions or fluid pumps. So we've added more fluid pumps to our hospital so we can have more patients hooked up to those at the same time, so we can support more critical care at a time.
And in our last minute, I understand the sanctuary is now treating 2 red-shoulder hawks and a black vulture for lead poisoning. How are they faring? Do they have a good chance to regain health and be released back into the wild?
Yeah, so they have a mixed prognosis right now. So the black vulture is one of our newest patients, only came in yesterday, also has a fractured wing. So he has a good chance of recovering from the lead poisoning. We will see with the fracture or the metal that is actually in his GI right now. The red-shouldered hawk, one of them came in purely for lead poisoning. That one has gone through, is on its second round of chelation, is so far doing well, and the symptoms of lead poisoning has diminished. We think that one is promising. The second red-shouldered hawk actually has developed lead poisoning through being shot with lead shot, and because some of those pellets are fragmented and in the fracture site, there's a lot of blood flow to those areas, which is absorbing it. So his lead levels are staying constant despite repeated chelation. So that one's still a guarded prognosis, as well as guarded due to the fact that he has both a broken wing and broken leg and 19 pellets in him.
Wow.
But so far, all the healing is going in the right direction, and we are at least hopeful that he will survive, though it is too early to see if he'll be released or not.
Okay. Well, good luck with those birds and the others that are coming to you. Kira Klebee is the Rehabilitation Director at the World Bird Sanctuary. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kira.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.